Hello everyone, my name is Paige Gibbons Backus and I am the site manager here at Brentsville Courthouse Historic Center, and we are coming to you on a beautiful spring day to talk about the architecture here of the public buildings here at Brentsville Courthouse Historic Center. When Brentsville was created in 1820, you had 56 acres that was set aside from the Commonwealth of Virginia in order to create the town of Brentsville that would serve as the 4th county seat. In order to make the town a functioning government center, you would have to have 3 government buildings constructed here on site. You have the courthouse that you see behind me, you have the jail, and you have the clerk's office. And so in 1820, when the town was created, a notice was sent out to the builders in order to try and get bids to construct the public buildings that you see here. To talk about the notice to builders to build all of these public buildings here at Brentsville, I'm actually going to pull a quote from our site book that was actually written by staff here about the history of Brentsville. And so in the Palladium of Liberty that's published in Warrenton, Virginia, there was a notice that was published that says, "The undersigned commissioners will attend at the tavern of John Maddox near the present-day Bristow on Thursday, the 28th day of September, for the purpose of letting to the lowest bidder the building of a courthouse, a jail, and a clerk's office for said county of the following dimensions and materials. Each of the buildings were to be made of brick with a foundation of stone and scantling of good oak timber. The only difference between each of these buildings here was the size as well as the roofing materials." So we can see in that notice to builders, all of the specifications were met by the different architects who constructed each one of these different buildings. And so there are similarities between the courthouse and the jail and eventually the clerk's office, but unfortunately, as you can see when you visit the site today, our clerk's office no longer stands. It's only the courthouse and the jail that you can visit today. Now, each of these buildings are made out of brick. Each of these buildings do have stone foundations, but each of these buildings are made and designed by different architects. Unfortunately, historians don't know who was the architect who designed and built the clerk's office that no longer stands. The architect for the Brentsville Jail Museum was a man named James Driscoll, who was a mason who was actually an Irish immigrant who came from County Cork, Ireland, who came here to Virginia and was eventually naturalized as an American citizen in the courthouse that stands here behind us. Behind us in the courthouse, this building was designed by a man named William Claytors. And as the architects of these buildings, they actually made all of these buildings, as in the notice, made to look very similar, in a very similar, simple federal style architecture that's based on simplicity and symmetry. And so the biggest difference between each of these different buildings being made out of brick and having a stone foundation are the roofing materials. Our courthouse and our jail have wooden shingles that made of cypress on the roof. Our clerk's office that would have stood had slate, stone shingles. And the reason for this is to help better protect against fire, where all those documents such as the wedding records, death certificates, birth certificates, tax records, court books, clerk books are all stored there in that building. What we're going to do is we're going to actually take a look here around the courthouse, and we're going to point out some of the interesting architectural features that you would see when you get up and close with this building. So one of the most striking architectural features here about these public buildings are the maker's marks that are actually attached to them that tell us who was the architects behind each of the public buildings here at Brentsville. So I mentioned James Driscoll. He has a maker's mark that's actually on the side of the Brentsville jail. Behind me, up towards the cupola, you actually have a maker's mark for William Claytors, who is the architect of the Brentsville courthouse. However, I like to call our maker's mark here a history mystery. Because if you look at our maker's mark, you'll notice that there's actually a mistake on it. So the maker's mark says Prince William County Courthouse, built by William Claytors, architect. But you notice there's two different Williams, and those two different Williams are spelled two different ways. So if you look at the William in Prince William, it's actually missing an I, and so it actually says Prince Willem instead. And we don't know if the masons just ran out of room as they were carving the stone. We don't know if there was a mispronunciation of Prince William, but that mistake is the original mistake that is still there after over 200 years. So now we're on the east side of the courthouse, and one of the things to think about when looking at these buildings that are over 200 years old is that these buildings are made without modern technology that we are used to today. And so all of these buildings are made by hand. And in the 19th century, these buildings in 1820 are made using enslaved labor. And so the bricks that you see behind me are actually all handmade bricks. And historians believe that these bricks were actually dug out of the hillside here at Brentsville and made in a kiln here on site. So if you walk our nature trail, you'll see some pretty big craters along the nature trail that we believe were some of these clay pits that were used to dug out in order to make the bricks that you see behind me. Now, because these bricks were all made by hand, because these bricks were all made on site, they're not always perfect. They all don't look the same. Some of the bricks behind me might be a little bit more black. They might be a little bit more shiny. That's because those bricks were overfired. They were burned, if you will. In addition to this, there are cracks and there are folds in the brick from making the clay bricks by hand, and there are fingerprints. And we can see evidence of that, evidence pointing to this hand labor that was used to make the bricks if you look at all of our buildings here at Brentsville. So behind me, up towards the top, right by one of these burned bricks, you'll actually see there's a thumbprint. In addition to this, here just above me, you'll see there's 3 fingers. However, if you put your 3 fingers together as an adult, these fingers, my fingers are too big to fit on these fingerprints. And so that can tell historians that you had, in many cases, younger children, younger adults working on these bricks as well. But unfortunately, we don't know a lot of information and a lot of history about the African Americans who were forced to work here on these buildings, making the bricks and doing this type of construction. All right, so now we're here on the southwest corner of the courthouse where, looking at these bricks, they can tell us another piece of history that we can learn about from these buildings. You notice that there are 2 different brick patterns. So the one facing the front of the courthouse is what's called a Flemish bond, and that rotates the short ends of the bricks and the long ends of the bricks, the headers and the stretchers. If you look at the side wall here behind me, you have what's called a common bond, which is several lines of stretchers and 1 line of headers. And the reason why we have 2 different brick patterns here on the courthouse is, again, going back to that notice for builders and that lowest bid. Because if you look at the bricks that are being made here on hand, made here on site, if you have a Flemish bond, what we have here on the front, that takes twice the amount of bricks than it would here on the common bond side, on the side. And so in an effort for these architects and for these builders to save money, they used more of the bricks there on the front, created a nicer brick pattern, created a nicer looking front to their building, and saved some money on the sides. Now, that's common to see in the 19th century, even up until today. But you'll see this not only with the front and with the sides and backs of your buildings, you'll also see this on the inside of your buildings too, with the first floor and then the second floor, which is a lot plainer than the first floor in order to save some of this money. So looking around these historic buildings, we didn't even go inside, but even if you walk around the outside, you can learn a lot of information about the history of Brentsville and the history of Prince William County. Now, on a lot of our historic buildings, somewhere on the building, you'll see a plaque. Like you can see a plaque behind me here on the front of the courthouse that says this building is significant to Prince William County's history. And you'll see that in a lot of our sites and a lot of these historic buildings here throughout the county. If you're interested in learning more about Brentsville, if you're interested in learning more about these historic buildings, please feel free to visit our website at www.pwcva.gov/history or follow us on our social media channels. Thank you so much for joining me today.